Okay, everyone. So, hope you guys are having a good day. So last class or last module, we were talking about the 12 principles of animation. This is a term you're going to hear a lot if you look up or if you read any books on animation. You definitely will hear people talk about the 12 principles of animation. We talked about them last week, but I just want to go through them some more and just talk about the concepts because they're important and it's something that we're going to constantly be referring to, so it's good just to go a little over it. So the concepts are kind of just like techniques, if you will. You don't have to follow them, but by following them, your animations will look quote-unquote better or smoother. Okay, so there's 12 basic principles, what's referred to as squash and stretch, anticipation, staging, arcs, solid drawing, pose-to-pose drawing or animating versus straight-ahead drawing or animating, slow in, slow out, follow-through, exaggeration, spacing and timing, secondary actions, and appeal. So squash and stretch is what we talked about last class, and we did a little sort of bouncing ball. Basically, if you watch, especially like old school, like Warner Brothers cartoons, like Bugs Bunny and such, if you want an object to really feel like it's moving and reacting, it helps to have a little squash or stretch. Think of your object being made of like almost like silly putty, where it can stretch a little bit or it can squash just a little bit. All right, so this is this principle. We did the bouncing ball, but it doesn't just have to be a ball. It could be, characters that are exaggerated. Does squash and stretch happen in real life? A little bit, not obviously to the extreme that happens in cartoons, but the point of a cartoon or animation is not to mimic reality, it's to extend reality. So here it's like this character is stretching here and then boom, squash, the character here is like stretching as they're jumping. And the stretching and squashing just kind of, they, what's the word I'm looking for? They support the action. They make the action more interesting. Anticipation is when you pose your character in a way that lets the audience know what they're about to do. So like, it sort of preps or primes the audience. So if like I might, instead of, if my character was going to run, rather than running, you do the old sort of like, and you run in the other direction. Okay. So think about like, if you're having someone throwing a baseball, you like wind up really far. This has to do a little bit with staging and positioning your character in a more extreme manner. If I was having someone smash a hammer, rather than just kind of do this with a hammer, I might like have it all the way back with the hammer and then, in a nice extreme pose. This extreme pose tells everyone, hey, I'm about to smash something with a sledgehammer. I'm about to use this baseball bat. Staging is another thing that is helpful. Staging is presenting your character and your action in a way that makes sense to the audience. So, the way I like to think of it is think about pantomiming. Have you ever done pantomiming? The whole point is like, you're walking against the wind. I can't really do all this, but if I was like in the room with you, I'd be like, you're walking against the wind. It's so, you sort of exaggerate all of your movements, your arm movements, your facial expressions, things like that. Here it's like, the whole point is like we're positioning the body language of my character and the objects, make it easy to understand what's happening. So this duck is a magician. I can easily see that, even though, like, I don't know if a magician would ever, like, do that. I don't think they would. But the point is, it's not about how it would really necessarily go in real life. It's about presenting this to the audience in a way that makes sense. Here's that same action where the camera kind of, moved from here to this direction. And you can see it's a lot harder to tell what's going on, even though it's literally the same action, right? And so there's this idea that like it's called the silhouette test, where you can take the character and the action and you can make it into a silhouette and people can still tell what's going on. That's good staging. Okay, so it's like you're really kind of exaggerating the movement of arms, hair, using hair and body language to tell a story or tell an action, so to speak. So I can look at this character and go, this character's walking against the wind. How can I tell? Well, she's hunched over the way you would in extreme weather. Her hair is flapping backwards. That's another way to tell. She's got other things that are flapping backwards in the wind. So all of this is telling the story of she is walking in a windstorm or a rainstorm. I don't, would rain help? Sure, it would. It would sort of reinforce the action. But I can tell from her body language what's going on. Arcs, we did this as part of the bouncing ball. Things don't really move in straight linear lines unless they're mechanical, like an elevator or something. So having things move in arcs is much more natural and feels more fluid. So like when people move their arms, they swing their arms, We did this with the bouncing ball, where the ball did not go in like linear lines. Instead, it kind of bounced and did arcs. Same with arm movements here. It's like it doesn't just move up and down. It kind of moves in an arc formation. Solid drawing is the idea of drawing something that has volume. So, if you're trying to draw something, here I have a circle, right? So the circle is flat, but if I do something like this, I'm starting to add three-dimensional depth to this, right? So something like that this is solid drawing versus if I drew something like this, where this is flatter. It doesn't feel like it has depth to it. This feels like it has depth to it, even though I haven't particularly changed the character very much, and I might say, well, it's because of those lines, but even if I subtracted those lines, just the position of everything still makes it feel like this has a little more three-dimensional space than this one does, even though it's the same expression. So solid drawing, trying to imagine your character as a three-dimensional shape. This has to do with body language, how the lines, this line coming in ahead of this line gives this sense of depth here. This drapery coming towards the camera gives a sense of depth going backwards here. The position of the feet feels more natural. It's kind of in this like pointed, foot direction. So even though our characters are two-dimensional, meaning they're not done in like a 3D program, they should still feel like they have depth to them. They shouldn't feel necessarily, unless you're really going for a very stylized look, like a South Park look or something, it shouldn't feel like they're flat, like pieces of paper, glued together. Straight ahead to pose has to do with animating and deciding whether or not you want to set some key poses and then animate in between them, or if you just want to sort of animate on the fly, where you just go frame to frame to frame. There's pros and cons to both. Pose to pose is better when you want key actions to occur. You're worried about how many frames it's going to take up. Straight ahead is really good when the objects are more natural, like fire or water, where it really wouldn't make much sense to try to plan ahead because it's too complicated. It's too complicated of a drawing. You just want to go frame to frame and just sort of see where things lead, so to speak. Slow in, slow out. So what this means is that when things start to gain speed, there are more drawings at the beginning. Because if you think about it, more drawings mean they're closer together, which means that things are going slower, which makes sense. Like if something is starting off, it's gaining momentum. So it's not going to be at its top speed right away. So something like this is this ball is sort of starting slower, and then the frames are going to get farther and farther from each other to show that this is speeding up. This down here is what we call a timing chart. These are the frame numbers, and these are basically how close they are. So you can see, like, at the beginning, the first couple frames are really close to each other, and then they start to space out, meaning that they're speeding up. So, for instance, if you had like a ball on a string and you released it, it would actually start slow, but then it would actually gain momentum as it kind of falls, because it's actually falling with gravity, which is causing it to speed up. But then, as it actually swings past this part, it's actually now fighting against gravity. So as it fights against gravity, it's actually slowing down, and when it slows down, once again, you're going to have more drawings, and then it falls again, and it actually gains momentum back, and it kind of goes from this, loses momentum, gains momentum, loses momentum, gains momentum. This is once again like, this is sort of a timing chart here. You can see that the character is starting slow with the wind-up. These are going to be kind of further apart, and then they're going to kind of release. Overlap and follow-through is the idea that objects, a complex object, every part of the object is not going to move at the same speed. So things like hair are going to be maybe a little bit slower than the rest of the body, or like clothing or something like that. This is because, like, let's say I was wearing like a very billowy shirt that has, or like a cape or something. Even though I'm wearing it, it's not like skin tight. So like my body is moving, and then there's a little bit of wind resistance against my clothing. So it's not gonna, not that it's gonna be like really far behind, but it's not gonna move at exactly the same pace. So here in this example, it's like this dog is turning its head, and the ears are actually coming, the face comes first, then the ears, and then actually you can see that the tie and the face are actually, the tie is like just a little bit slower than the face movement, and kind of comes in here at the end. Same thing here, it's like the superhero is falling, and then the cape kind of falls a couple frames afterwards. Or this woman is tossing her head back, and then her hair is just slightly behind her head moving. Just a little bit. Not like dramatically, but just a little bit. Spacing and timing refers to how many frames you have. So, if a ball is bouncing, you would have to draw it in a way that makes sense in terms of the spacing. Like, it wouldn't just magically jump. If I had a ball bouncing, it doesn't magically jump to the other side of the screen, because that's not how balls work in real life. So like having, how far things are from each other, the speed of things, like it just has to feel real. So like, and timing is one of these things. It's a hard thing to master, but just like looking at it and thinking about, does it feel too fast? Does it feel too slow? If it's too fast, you may want to add some frames in between, or do on the twos to sort of double up and slow it down a little bit. Or if it's too slow, you're going to have to go back and either bring the drawings closer to each other physically in space, or just get rid of a couple of frames to speed up the process and hope it doesn't look too choppy. Exaggeration, this is, as I like to say, cartoons and animation are not about reality. They're not about depicting reality. You want to depict reality, get a video camera, okay? Animations are not about reality, they're about extending reality. Which is to say, we can have a character where their eye, where there's some sort of exaggeration. Their hands get really big, or their eyes are very big, or we get this overreaction, these giant mouths and everything reacting, right? And it just makes the animation more interesting. It's all about expression, expressing through eyes, through mouth, through movements. Secondary action. A secondary action is, like it sounds like, an action in addition to the main action. So, for instance, if I'm moving, or if I was like jumping up and down, it's like, well, my arms are moving, but so is my shirt, and my head might be bobbing back and forth. And that makes my character feel more complex. It doesn't, if you just animate one thing, it has a tendency to feel a little bit stiff, kind of like it's a mannequin that just happens to be animating. So secondary actions help with this. So, for instance, in this case, my character might be moving this arrow back and forth while also waving its hand. So waving the hand is the primary action, and then moving the arrow back and forth is the secondary action. In theory, the secondary action should really emphasize the main action. It shouldn't be taking away from whatever the action is. So here it's like this character is running, that's the main action. The secondary action is like the hat kind of flopping. Or here, the main action is like the reaction shot. The secondary action is this hat that's kind of bobbing back and forth. Finally, we have appeal. Appeal is just, it's one of these sort of je ne sais quoi intangibles of like something that's interesting. And I know that sounds kind of, well, what does that mean? It's hard to say. It's hard to say what makes something quote unquote interesting. But we want a character that, whether it's the expression or the colors or the facial expressions or how the character talks or how they're drawn, we need something that the character appeals to people in the same way that, like, certain actors and actresses appeal to general audiences, whether it's the way they're styled or whether the way they talk, or something about them that's interesting or unique about that makes people go, oh, I like that person, or that person is interesting in some way, shape, or form. Remember that cartoons are a lot like actors and actresses in a movie. They have to be interesting. You wouldn't want to watch a movie where you're bored by the main characters. You don't want to watch an animation where you're bored by the characters in it, right? So that's where appeal comes from, having some form of that je ne sais quoi, so to speak, that charisma. All right, so that's just a review of the 12 principles. In the next video, we're going to do our main action of today, which is we're going to be animating a falling brick.